Hello BookTube. This is the conclusion of my 2023 library tour and the history wall. I have 3 shelves I want to show you. Again, as with a number of these shelves at the end of the history wall, I haven't read many of them, although there are quite a few that I have read. So let's get going because there is a discussion video I want to make after this video, so let's get going. So first up on these shelves is The Greek Revolution, 1821 and the Making of Modern Europe by Mark Mazauer. Next is Bismarck, A Life by Jonathan Steinberg. Next is Peter the Great, His Life and World by Robert K. Massey. Next is a work of World War II history, Britain at Bay, The Epic Story of the Second World War, 1938 to 1941 by Alan Allport. Moving to ancient history, this is The Pharaoh's Treasure, The Origin of Paper and the Rise of Western Civilization by John Godet, or Godet. Leaping to the American West, this is Shotguns and Stagecoaches, The Brave Men Who Rode for Wells Fargo in the Wild West by John Bosanecker. And then moving back to Russian history, this is Catherine the Great and Potemkin, The Imperial Love Affair by Simon Sebag Montefiore, who we will see later. The next 3 books are all part of a trilogy, the Theodore Roosevelt trilogy by Edmund Morris. This is The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. Next is Theodore Rex. And finally, Colonel Roosevelt. Next is The Mongol Storm, Making and Breaking Empires in the Medieval Near East by Nicholas Morton. And sticking with nomadic empires, this is the Scythian Empire, Central Eurasia and the Birth of the Classical Age from Persia to China by Christopher I. Beckwith. So this is a book that argues that the Scythian Empire were the foundations of the Persian Empire and the Chinese Empire. The Persian Empire, via a sort of a suppositional sort of Scythian Empire that was allied with the Assyrians, who were later sort of taken over by the Medes and then later the Persians. But Beckwith's argument is that the ruling dynasty were the same dynasty, just different factions of that dynasty. And that the same thing happened in Western China, that the Qin and Chao states were ruled by a branch of this Scythian royal line. The argument is largely linguistic and went over my head, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't think I was convinced by Beckwith's argument. Next is Road to Disaster, A New History of America's Descent into Vietnam by Brian Van de Mark. This is American Demagogue, The Great Awakening and the Rise and Fall of Populism by J.D. Dickey. And the last book on this shelf, Princess of the Renaissance, The Hidden Power Behind an Artistic Revolution by Mary Hollingsworth. I've wanted to read this book for a while and quite happy to have it. Moving on. The first book on this next shelf is A Work of Ancient History. Carthage Must Be Destroyed, The Rise and Fall of an Ancient Civilization by Richard Miles. Next is Freedom, The Overthrowing of the Slave Empires by James Walvin. Moving on to Indian history. Indian Summer, The Secret History of the End of an Empire by Alex von Tunzelmann. The next two books are about the Nile River. First up is Explorers of the Nile, The Triumph and Tragedy of a Great Victorian Adventure by Tim Gill. And I also have the more recent River of the Gods, Genius, Courage, and Betrayal in the Search for the Source of the Nile by Candice Millard. Next is a now royal biography. Well, scheisse. Okay, well, let's keep going. So this is Prince Charles, The Passions and Paradoxes of an Improbable Life by Sally Biddle Smith. This is a great biography of now King Charles. We've already seen him. Okay, so do that later. Okay, and we've already seen that one. Okay, so this is The Chinese Question, The Gold Rushes in Global Politics by Mei Nai. I have unfinished business with this book. It's about Chinese immigration in the Anglosphere or Anglophone world. This is Red Heat, Conspiracy, Murder, and the Cold War in the Caribbean by Alex von Tunzelmann. This is The Lost Promise, American Universities in the 1960s by Ellen Schrecker. Okay, I've already seen that one. This is A Tournament of Shadows, The Great Game and the Race for Empire in Central Asia by Carl E. Meyer and Shireen Blair Brysack. This is The Perils of Interpreting, The Extraordinary Lives of Two Translators Between Qing, China, and the British Empire by Henrietta Harrison. I like the first part of this book that led up to this moment, the meeting with the Qing Emperor by a young boy. But the later part of the book I didn't particularly care for as much. But I do want to come back to it at some point. I come over here and pick up Carthage Must Be Destroyed and Freedom. Okay. This is The Last Medieval Queens by J.L. Lanesmith. It's a fantastic look at queenship in the late Middle Ages in England. This is Papyrus, The Invention of Books in the Ancient World by Irene Vallejo, translated by Charlotte Whittle. This is a wonderful look at the invention of books and writing. And it's a weird book because it's not just that, it's like the history of books and reading since the classical period. This is The Last White Rose, The Secret Wars of the Tudors by Desmond Seward. Four Queens, The Provençal Sisters Who Ruled Europe by Nancy Goldstone. And Another book I have some unfinished business with, Not One Inch, America, Russia, and the Making of Post-Cold War Stalemate by Amy Sarraute. This is when I read of it, I liked, but I need to give it another go, definitely. Okay, so the last shelf. First up is Iron and Blood, A Military History of the German-Speaking People Since 1500 by Peter H. Wilson. Also by Peter H. Wilson, this is The Heart of Europe, A History of the Holy Roman Empire. I have a sweet tooth for the Holy Roman Empire. Next is Tudor England, A History by Lucy Wooding. Next up is The Return of Simon Sebag Montefiore. This is The Romanovs, 1613 to 1918. Again, I have a sweet tooth for royal or dynastic histories. Next is a big biography of Napoleon. This is Napoleon Alive by Andrew Roberts. And the last 4 books are all of Bronze Age histories, and all of which I have reviewed on Open Letters. First up is Pharaohs of the Sun, The Rise and Fall of Tutankhamun's Dynasty by Guy de la Baudelaire. So this is a history of the 18th dynasty, which I liked, but I have some serious issues with. De la Baudelaire has a tendency to cast back contemporary sort of constructions onto the late Bronze Age, which leads to a bit of mismarbling. There's any number of comparisons between the 18th dynasty and 20th century totalitarian dictators. There's also a chapter about a body in a tomb that really could have been left out. But on the whole, it is an interesting look at the 18th dynasty. Next is Egypt's Golden Couple, When Akhenaten and Nefertiti Were Gods on Earth by John Darnell and Colleen Darnell. So this is a history of the reign of Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti. There are some good parts to the book. My review is quite negative because the beginning of each chapter is a fictionalized moment. There are bits of memoir within some of the chapters, and that bugged me to no end. And I think they focused a little too much on the religious aspects of Akhenaten's reign rather than other parts that could have been that were as interesting. I thought the brief bits on the diplomacy was really fascinating. Next up is Tutankhamun's Trumpet, Ancient Egypt and 100 Objects from the Boy King's Tomb by Toby Wilkinson. This is an interesting way of doing ancient Egyptian history. And I like the idea. I just thought that it got repetitive. Wilkinson breaks down the book into 10 chapters of 10 items. And unfortunately, a lot of those chapters tend to repeat. So I thought maybe a better organizational scheme could have benefited the book a lot more. And finally, the last book. Weavers, Scribes, and Kings, A New History of the Ancient Near East by Amanda H. Podany. This is a wonderful history of the Bronze Age, and really the history of cuneiform writing. I love this book so much. My only issue is that there isn't a conclusion. And I think this book really needed one, but this is history as it should be written. It was a delight to read. That concludes my 2023 library tour. Now I need to figure out what happened to this penultimate shelf, and I apologize for that bit of a disaster. I think if I do a 2024 library tour, I will take the books off of the shelves so I can do some cleaning. But anyway, so I will be back in a few moments with a sort of a Camp NaNoWriMo type discussion. So until then, thank you, BookTube. Have a great afternoon and stay safe.